Hello, welcome back to Bald and Board Games. I'm Bald.
I'm bored.
And this is a How to Play, and we're playing Tiny Epic Vikings by Gamelin Games. What is Tiny Epic Vikings, Board?
So Tiny Epic Vikings here is a fun little area control game. As you can see, the board is pretty small.
It's tiny, but the game is epic.
And the purpose of this game is you have a Viking fleet, pretty much. So you have some ships, you'll have some settlers, you'll have some temples, and you're going to go throughout the game board and try to take over different islands and claim influence over them.
Yep. Yeah, and so the initial setup that we have for the game here, on this board, you have your different islands. Each of the islands have a rune. These runes are going to be collecting during the game. It's going to be end game scoring for you, and they also help you do effects on cards, which we'll explain in a moment. Additionally, on these islands, you have little villages here. Villages can be raided, and you'll end up taking that token when you successfully raid a village, and we'll go over how to do that in a moment as well. Those tokens can be used to perform actions during the game, which again, we'll cover in a moment. On the board for 2 players, you actually start off with 2 other factions there, just kind of to be a pain. So these are NPC factions. They don't move, they don't go anywhere. They're just there to stop you from getting those individual runes, and they were placed out randomly. They do get placed out on one of the 3 islands on the outside of the board. On the other side of the board, there are more islands for a higher player count. Additionally, above the board and below the board, you have these favor cards. So during the game, you're going to be trying to collect these as well. You can only ever hold 3 of these. When you collect them, you will gain the resources that are listed in the bag on there. And then at the end of the game, that rune will be end game scoring. These runes on the cards are not used for the cards you end up playing. At the top of the board here, you have your gods you're trying to gain favor with. So anytime one of these runes is collected off an island, or anytime somebody steals it from somebody else, this rune, or this little icon that matches the rune, will go up on its respective board. This is also the case if you end up battling and you end up winning that battle. But so how do we get cards? What's that process like?
So the hand start count goes based on what era you're in. So there's 3 eras in this game. So as you can see here, we have a 4, a 5, and a 6 for eras 1, 2, and 3. So each player would get 4 cards. We'll explain exactly how the cards get dealt out in a minute. But just to go over, as Nick brought up, battling and what the cards actually are able to do for you, each card has 3 symbols. So on the very top, it gives you a battle amount. So in this case here, you can see this is 10, but it costs you 1 ore resource, which will be on your player card over here, to utilize. Some of these will just say 1. Others will say, like in this case, 3 times however many sea ruins you have in the played cards in front of you. The second marker will be the free action that you get by playing this card face up. So if you play the card face down, that indicates battle. If you play it face up, that indicates you want this action or just to use a card because you have to play a card. There's a whole variance of abilities that this middle one can do. For example, the one here on the card is you can move 1 settler from one island to another adjacent island of your choice. There is also ones such as this, which means you can harvest 4 resources. On your player board, you will have a resource count, and you have these little markers that tell you how many resources you have of wheat, of wood, and of silver ore. And you can move those up by using these. Those resources will be used across the course of the game to do different actions. There also will be a sailing one. So you can utilize this to actually sail across the game board to go from island to island, or just go across the sea to try to get closer to another island for the following turn. The final one, which is not on one of these cards, but you can see the symbol here. Now you can see the symbol here, is a little hammer, and that is the build action. So if you would like to build a temple on your island, or if you would like to build a ship and get a new ship onto the fjord space, which is the water spaces, you can utilize that action as well. And then the last thing about the card is on the very bottom, you have an optional card if you meet the requirements. So for example, if I had played these two cards side by side, this card has an F requirement. The F rune was played during my line of cards, so I can sail for 3 and then I can move 1 settler from to another island. If it was played the other way, there is no F available, so this is not of use, and this one will not be of use because there's no 2N ruin symbols available either.
In regards to that bonus action, that's what I was alluding to when I was talking about these runes on the island. So in that second situation, if he played the F first, if he had this F rune, then he could still do that bonus action. That rune that's listed in the bonus action area has to come from either the runes you have collected or the cards you have played previously.
Yes.
In regards to moving, the sail action that he mentioned you can go from fjord to fjord or across the sea, which is fjord to fjord to fjord. The way that you count out that movement is going from fjord to fjord, like he mentioned. You can go fjord to docking point to fjord, or you can go from docking point in general just to fjord. So each of those movements, docking point to fjord is 1, fjord to fjord is 1, and fjord to docking is a different one. So there's 3 ways that you can use those movement points. And on the board, you'll see docking points that have a ship icon and docking points that have these village icons. They're both docking points. They're all valid. But to dock, you of course have to be in a connected fjord. Fjord is a lot of fun to say.
Sure.
There's a lot of icons in this. Allow you to do different things. It's going to be best for you just to look at the rule book when you get the game and reference it as you see them and keep going. I think Steve covered the basic ones, which is moving your settlers, sailing your ship, building, and harvesting. Those are the main ones that you'll end up doing. So in addition to those on the cards, I mentioned these villages that when you raid them, you collect that village token. These village tokens can be placed on the cards over here to do the actions that are listed here. The number of tokens that can be placed at each action is equal to the number of players that are playing. So here there's 2 of us, which means at most this action can only be done twice. Any of these actions can only be done twice. Now, with that being said, it's not once by each player. One player can do one of those actions twice. However, they cannot do the same action in the same turn. So if I were to use one of these on the sail portion, I can't do that again. But on my next turn, I could then use another one on the sail portion, provided there hasn't been a second one placed there already. And then you would take the subsequent action. So let's cover how did they get their deck of cards, and then let's go into the turn rounds and orders.
So getting a hand of cards is pretty simple. Each player for round 1, as marked here, will get dealt 4 cards. So we each get dealt 4 cards. We're able to look at our cards, but because there's only 2 of us playing, we act as if there's an AI deck. So in this case, we have an AI deck of 3 cards. So that deck is just placed randomly somewhere. So we'll just place it right here for easy access for both of us. So we'll take our deck of 4, our hand of 4. We'll go through and decide, hey, this is the card I want. We will then utilize the motion based on here. So in this case, it's a clockwise motion. So Nick would hand into where the AI deck was. I would hand to Nick, and I would take the AI deck. When you hand into the AI deck, as Nick did not do, you shuffle these and randomly discard 1. And then you progress until all cards have been utilized.
It doesn't matter who does it. So the AI doesn't actually have a deck that's going to be playing against you while you guys play. That drafting cycle using the AI is really just there to simulate another player choosing cards. Now, of course, they're chosen at random, so you don't know which one the AI is going to choose. So it simulates you having to make sure you choose the card you want the most and the potential that somebody else could take it. At the end, for the first round, all players should have 4 cards. And now the AI deck is only used, like Steve said, in a 2-player game. If you're playing with 3 or more, you won't be using that AI functionality. And then you'll do this each round. However, as the rounds tick down, next time there will be 5 cards you'll end up with, and that cycle of drafting goes the opposite way. It goes counterclockwise. And then for the last round, you'll end up with 6 cards, and that cycle of drafting will go clockwise again. And so the game is played over 3 rounds, and you can do a variety of things on your turn each round.
Yeah, so the strategy overall can vary from player to player, but the general perspective is you want to go across the islands, you want to raid to be able to gain these little tokens, to be able to have more abilities and benefits. You want to take over the island and add influence to it to collect the ruins, and you want to battle, which helps you gain all of these cards for the ruin as well as for the resources. So the one thing to bring up right now in consideration is, what is influence? How do you take over an island? On your little game board, you have 3 sections. Your settlers, you start with 6 settlers. You have 3 additional ships plus the one on the board, and you have 2 temples. Each of these will tell you the influence. So a settler provides you 1 influence per settler. A ship provides you 2, and a temple provides you 4. The difference is a ship does not like go onto the island.
Just shipwreck it.
It just lands on shore.
Influence!
The ship would stay in the port on the dock. So if that ship leaves, that influence is gone.
It leaves as well.
So for example, if I had 1 settler and 1 ship on this island, that would be 3 influence. 2 for the ship, 1 for the settler. If on my next turn, I'm like, I want to go elsewhere, this settler is now by themselves, there's only 1 influence. I still would get the ruin because I am leading, but if someone else comes and drops 2 settlers there, not only do I lose the little ruin to the other player.
Rune. It's not a ruin.
Ruin.
No, it's a rune.
R-U-N-E, ruin.
Yeah, a ruin is like a castle that's collapsed. Not only do I gain the stones that are part of an old castle, I gain, yes.
So if another player were to go to this island and place 2 settlers there, not only do they gain the little N marker,
rune,
but because they have settled and triumphed over my area, I lose 1 settler on that island, and it goes back to my game board.
Yeah, and so to be very clear in regards to gaining the rune initially, so Stephen, when he had his boat here and his settler there, he was able to take that rune because, yes, he had the most influence, but he also had what's called boots on the ground. So the settler and the temple count as boots on the ground. What that means is if all you have there are those people with boots on the ground, you can take the rune. If you don't have any boots on the ground, so say you had the ship, technically you have the most influence, but because there's no boots on the ground, you don't get this rune. It stays there. So I could come in with I have to use 3 people. I probably would use a ship that time. So I could come in like this with my ship and my settler, and I have more influence and boots on the ground, so then I would take this. However, if I just had 2 of my ships parked here, I wouldn't get that rune even though I have more influence because there's no boots on the ground. So you always need to have some combination of boots on the ground, whether it be a temple and a settler, or multiple settlers.
Yes, and you might be wondering, okay, how do you get settlers on an island? That comes from sailing. So if you play a card similar to this that says sail 3, if I started right here in this fjord, I can now move into this port. That's a sail of 1. I can go up to 3. I don't have to use all 3.
Right.
But as soon as you have a card or you've utilized a bonus that allows you to sail, you can place up to this number in settlers on that island. Additionally, when you go to an island, let's say you're right here, you can decide to raid it. What raiding the island means, and raiding comes with a cost of either 1 in the first era, 2 in the second, 3 in the third. By raiding, that is how you gain this little token here. That does not have to be done based on your count. You can just be at the island, starting your next turn, raid, and then leave. But to put settlers down, you must actually be sailing to the island, unless you have a card that moves settlers elsewhere.
And anytime you put anything on the board, settlers, boats, or temples, it does cost you resources like Steve mentioned earlier. So each settler that you put down is going to cost you 1 wheat. So if I put down my 2 settlers because I sailed to this area over here, 1, 2, I'm going to pay my 2 wheat to get them on there. And these costs are listed on your actual game board. So underneath the settler icon, you have the ship icon, which reminds you that you have to sail to put them out. And then you have in a red rectangle 1 and the wheat symbol, which means you have to spend 1 wheat to put those guys out. Now, when you put these guys out, as Steve mentioned earlier, so now I'm going to sail over to this area actually instead and put my 2 guys here. Whenever you deploy settlers or move settlers onto an island where you have more influence, more settlers than the other individuals, your settlers kill one of theirs. And that's where it gets removed off the board.
And then they respawn back onto your game board.
Yes, and that's a good point. If you ever run out of settlers, so say I had all of my settlers on these various islands, and I sailed a ship over to this one, and I want to put more settlers out. I can't. I don't have any more settlers on my game board, so I could not put any more onto the board. What I can do at the end of that turn is decide to take back any settlers that I would like and put them on my board for next turn.
Yes, the key there is that cannot be done mid-turn, so you cannot sail to an island, decide to move settlers to your game board, and then utilize those settlers. You have to either do it at the start of your turn before you've played a card or done any action, or actually it has to be done at the start of your turn, because it cannot be done at the end of your turn, because the other players still have the ability to take out your settlers. So at the very start of your turn, you're looking at your hand, you're like, ooh, I don't really have settlers I need.
I think you would have to
make that decision.
I think you'd have to do it at the end of your turn. It just says during your turn. So you can do it during your turn, remove them. You can't do it during the other player's turn.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So anytime during your turn or after you play your cards that get played first, you can remove settlers off the board, but you can't use them until the following turn. But be wary about removing settlers off the board. If you ever take all your boots or all your influence away from an island, like I just did there, that rune goes back to that island.
Yes.
Do not hold on to it.
Yeah, so you cannot just deploy to an island, claim the rune, and then undeploy everybody.
Yes. So we had a lot of talk about claiming runes. So obviously we went over how I can take a rune from Steve, how you take runes from islands. Anytime a rune is token, man, you're messing me up now. Like I mentioned earlier, every time a rune is taken, you will raise this little token up by 1 for whichever matching rune that is. If you ever lose a rune, it has to go back on the island, you do not raise that by 1. It's only ever raised if it's taken or if it's during a battle. So do you want to go over what a battle is?
Sure. So a battle takes place one of 2 ways. Option 1 is I could play on my turn a card face down. On Nick's turn, he plays a card face up. So he plays his turn as normal, harvests, sails, does whatever.
Mm-hmm.
What that allows me to do is automatically trigger a battle, but it's not against the player you're playing against. You actually take one of these cards, flip it face up, and then you have to beat that value. There is other conditions, so please pay attention to the rulebook based on the player count on how to add to this score. But then I flip my card. My card is 5 plus N, so 6. It beats the 4. I then win the battle. What that would mean is whatever card pre-battle that I chose to be trying to claim, I would now win. I would get the resources on the card, so 2 wheat, and then I would claim the card face down on top of my player card. As you can see, there's only 3 slots, so if you've claimed a 4th one throughout the rounds, you must discard one of your 3 and replace it. The second way to trigger a battle would be against another player. Mm-hmm. So I would play a card face down. Nick, on his very next turn, it has to be directly afterwards, would also play a card face down, and then we would go against each other. There would not be a generic card flipped. So in this case, the 8 would beat my 5. He would get their card as well as the resources on it. There is a fail forward mechanism in this game, which means that the loser, whether you're going against the NPC card or against the other player, the loser has to do 2 things. Number 1 is whatever symbol is on their card, they would move this token up 1 based on that symbol. And whatever wording is in this box here that is an ability, they can utilize the ability. So for example, for the card I just moved one up on, it says reveal the top card of the Viking deck, which is this deck here, and I can then perform both of these actions regardless of the requirement. You do not get to battle, but I can actually attempt to harvest 3 and then build as well. And each card of the gods has a different ability to them.
In addition, on those god cards, there is another spot to use your rated villages. If you place one of your rated villages on these icons, you will raise this god's fury by 2. And the god fury going up is important because at the end of the game, you will score points for each rune that you've collected in your cards up here, and the actual runes that you've collected, you'll get points based on where that fury card is at.
Yes, and before we get to endgame scoring, as we mentioned, there are 3 eras. So you would play your 4 cards for era 1. So would the other player.
You go one at a time, playing one card and the other card.
Yep.
And something that's important to mention actually in regards to the battling is when that battle happens. The battle will happen at the start of the player who initiated the battle's next turn.
Yes.
So that gives other players a chance to potentially lay down a card to battle, but it also gives a strategic advantage to the person who goes last. If they want to battle and they're going last, they'll just put that card face down, and then all you have to do is deal with this AI card, but the other player wouldn't be able to put a card down because they wouldn't have any left.
Correct.
But yeah, go back and forth one at a time, placing your cards down, doing the actions.
And you have this little first round marker. There is instructions in the game book on how that gets divvied out based on a few different requirements.
Yep.
And once you've played all 4 cards for era 1, everything on the board stays the same. So where your settlers are, where your ships are, where your temples are, stays the same. You would then put the cards in the discard pile.
Yep.
We would draw 5 cards this time, redistribute our hands, and then repeat. And then for era 3, do it for 6 cards. Once all 3 eras have ended, you would take your little scorecard. Here, this would be finished. The little eagle would come off. You would then flip it over, and each player will get a little grading token. So we would just place that down. We would start on the 0 mark, and we would go through exactly how you'd score.
15.
So, we'll slide this right here for everybody.
Oh, man.
Nick, would you like to explain how endgame scoring works?
Absolutely, Steve. Endgame scoring. So the Fury of the God cards are going to dictate the order in which these points on the bottom of the card get assigned to their specific runes. So here we have the Blue Fury of the God card with the highest point value at 3, which means that any runes that match that color will get 6 points. So here I have 1, which means I'll get 6 points for that rune. If anybody had the pink C, you would get 5 points for that. And if anybody had the orange, you would get 4 points for that. Next, we have the cards here that you got during battles that have runes on them. And the same thing applies here. So 5 would go to blue, 4 would go to pink, 3 would go to the orange. I have 2 of the orange Fs, which means I would get 6 points for those 2 orange Fs, putting me at 12. Steve sucks at this game, so he has 0 points because he has no runes and no cards. Now, beyond that, if you do end up tying, there are various tie breakers in the game involving your temples, your settlers, your boats, your runes, and your resources. So please refer to the rules to figure that out.
And like most games that have this scoring mechanism where you're just kind of counting victory points or experience points, whatever you call them, if you do happen to excel at the game and get past 40, you flip your little token over, it says plus 40, you put it back to 0 and continue counting. If you get past 80, no one should have caught up to you at that point, so you just win the game.
Yeah, getting to 40 would be crazy. Like, you really have to push those tracks up. It's going to be interesting to figure that out, see what runes you have if you could do that. It'll be fun. But yeah, I mean, the game that's pretty much the game. The actions you can take are pretty simple. The follow-up actions are the same as the regular actions, just you have to meet requirements to do those. The cost for everything to build them is on your actual cards. I think the only things we didn't quite mention that I'll mention now is when you're putting out a ship, it has to go into a fjord that's adjacent to any island where you have influence on it. And when you're putting out a temple, it has to go on any island where you have influence in the form of settlers, I believe.
Yes.
Yes.
Or if you have
The
a
ship
ship
as well?
The ship is docked there.
Okay.
You can take the build action and put the temple down because temple now becomes boots on the ground.
Yeah. So hopefully this was a good how-to for you. There's a lot going on here in this very tiny game. There's Tiny Epic's first game where they actually had a board. Fun fact. But it's a lot of fun. If you like strategic area control games where you can really get some point salad at the end with some card drafting, this is definitely your game. That card drafting is a lot of fun, and it's a good puzzle to start with rather than that back and forth. So I think we're going to dive in now. If you have any last words.
Please, after watching this video, check out the next video, which is our full playthrough.
Yes.
We'll probably get about 2 games in, maybe 3, depending how fast it goes.
Yep.
And we're going to tally up our scores cumulatively across the games to see who is the winner of this tournament.
Yeah, now we're saying that. Our Tiny Epic Dinosaurs game, if you haven't watched, go back and watch it. I was not aware we were going to be doing this. Neither of us were. We made a decision at the end to do it. But if I knew, I would have bred one more dinosaur at the very end, which I chose not to, which would have gotten me 3 points, which would have changed the outcome of the finale, which you can go watch and see for yourself on our YouTube channel.
But that won't help him here. You cannot breed your Vikings.
That would be ridiculous. But thank you for watching this how to play Tiny Epic Vikings by Gamelin Games. This is Bald and Board Games. I'm Bald.
I'm Bored.
We'll catch you next time.